Hello there, Mandy here. Restorative Grief with Mandy Capehart is not just a podcast. It's also a book, a free online grief group, and a one-on-one private coaching practice. If you are interested in learning more, visit mandykapehart.com to find out how restorative grief can help you heal heart, mind, body, and spirit. Welcome back to Restorative Grief with Mandy Capehart. You are listening to episode 201, titled When Grief Comes Home, with Erin Leigh Nelson and Colleen E. Montague. Navigating your own grief is hard enough, but how do you show up as a parent or a partner when you're hurting as well? That's the question at the heart of When Grief Comes Home, written by Erin Leigh Nelson and Colleen E. Montague. Drawing from their work at Jessica's House, inspired by the Dougy Center model, this book is a compassionate and practical guide for families facing loss, especially when children are involved. Hi, everyone. Welcome back to Restorative Grief with Mandy Capehart. I am your host, Mandy. And today on the show, I am joined with two wonderful humans. Erin Leigh Nelson and Colleen E. Montague are co-authors of a powerful new book, When Grief Comes Home. This compassionate guide draws from Erin's personal journey through multiple losses and Colleen's 20 plus years as a grief therapist. And so together, they have given us this beautiful collection of practical tools, honest language around loss, which we love, and invitational rituals to help families navigate grief when other children are still involved and alive. So whether you are walking through it yourself or just supporting someone who is experiencing these kinds of sorrows, this is going to be such a beautiful conversation. Erin, Colleen, thank you so much for both of you being here today.
Thanks for having us, Mandy.
Yeah, it's our pleasure. Thank you.
It's an honor. So I would love to start with you, Colleen. You have spent years sitting with families in their most painful moments, and certainly in the position that you're in now with Jessica's House. Tell us how you have felt your work come together with this book.
Yeah, when I was collecting hours towards licensure and really beginning clinical experience, I was really especially touched by the clients who were holding a loss. And it was just really a good time because at the same time, I was introduced to Jessica's House by Erin, who is our founder. And she presented this new ministry that she was starting from the ground. And I thought, man, that sounds really good. That is exactly what we need. And so I was able to start referring some of my clients over to Jessica's House. And I got to see, through personal therapy, but then also this peer support groups that they were attending outside of my time with them, I saw a lot of movement and progression, and I got to see some of the sparks return in their eyes. And I just was really intrigued at that point and really knew I had a passion for supporting grievers. And then became a volunteer a few years later, and I felt at home. It was so wonderful to honestly, it's a really sacred space to be invited alongside families who are grieving, and I don't take that lightly. But to get to watch the power of peer support and other parents holding each other through their pain, and then what the progression of time can offer, and when they do their work and just watching like their spark return. So I really owe a lot of credit to my teachings through Jessica's House of like how to really truly support a griever well.
Erin, what was it about Colleen that made you realize this is a woman I need to write a book with about how to do this work?
Yes. Oh, thank you, Mandy. When I met Colleen, she came in as a volunteer, and there was just something extremely compassionate about her. She was so warm, and her interaction with our other volunteers and with families really stood out to me. And so I was so grateful. It just happened to be that she wrote me a little note one day just saying, "Hey, I'm transitioning in my career." And I just thought to myself, oh, if there's any way that we can just hire her at Jessica's House, I would love to find a way. And it just happened to be that we had an opening during that time, and I got to sit with her in an interview. And I had been thinking about writing a book, just as you mentioned. I had had numerous losses. And I think you were just, how long had it been, Colleen, that you had been on the job?
2 weeks.
Just a few weeks.
Yeah.
I went to a writers conference and I was just driving back down. It was up in the hills at Mount Hermon in the Santa Cruz area in California. And I was driving down the hill and I called Colleen at work and just said, "Hey, do you want to write a book with me?" And so I just knew she would be the perfect person because she really embodies the spirit at Jessica's house as just a gentle companion to come alongside grievers. And she held so much expertise and so much of just who she is. I knew would be such a good match. And I have to say, it's weird to think that you could have fun writing a book together and just writing a book about grief in general. But we really did have such a great connection and we had a really good time writing this book together and just to talk it out and be together. And it was really special.
I think that's such a beautiful indication, though, of the joy that can exist in the grieving process and
Mm,
how when we collaborate creatively with one another, whether that is through a writing group, through cleaning the house together instead of doing it
mhm.
solo, through little practical things, those rituals become lifelines when we're in pain. Colleen, what is one of the things that you've seen families come together with peer support? Because we know there's professional support and then there's peer support, and often our peers don't feel so equipped or ready. So what are some of the ways that you've seen people, even as they're parenting their own children, come alongside one another in support?
The peer support model is so different than traditional therapy because as a therapist, you don't show who you are to your client. It's not about you, and so there is a little bit of that disconnect, as there should. That works in that area. But with peer support, the nice thing is that our parents come in and they do get to see how each other are. They all are holding a similar loss because we're an open-ended program. We have families joining all throughout different stages of, the loss that they're holding. And so we had a new family join this week in my group, and they were able to sit with other families who've been in our program for a year, or a little bit more or a little less, who have been holding their loss for longer than them. And there's so much power in that to see that they're surviving, they're doing okay, and so they think, well, gosh, maybe I can get there too. And so that's not something that a therapist can usually offer, their client. That is something that comes from peer support. And the other nice thing about what we can do, it's actually not what we're doing, it's what our families are doing, is they connect with each other outside of Jessica's house if they choose to. And so that same night with this new family, they exchanged phone numbers already. This particular group, they meet outside of group time at each other's homes. They have dinners together. They go to the cemeteries together. They're this connection and this like sustainable support that happens because it starts at Jessica's house, but then beyond, that is our hope for all of our families.
Colleen, that beautifully describes this sense of borrowed hope that you all talk about in the book as well. And I've often told people, if you don't have confidence, borrow mine. I believe in you, borrow my belief in
Mm.
you. What does it look like, Erin, for people to borrow hope from one another when they are facing down this loss and entering into these new groups and these really vulnerable, risky relationships with extended families that you don't know, right? Connecting with people that
Mhm.
you're trusting the process and trusting the environment at the most vulnerable time in your life.
Absolutely. I think when you walk through the doors of Jessica's house, so many of our families who have recent losses, I don't think that they really think they will get through such a devastating loss. We're serving families and particularly children who've lost a parent or sibling. So the adults that walk through the doors have lost a child or usually a spouse or partner. And it's such a disorienting loss. And they've lost what is normal for them just in everyday life. And so it's so hard for them to imagine that they'll be okay someday. And it's so hard for them to imagine just feeling like they could find any kind of wholeness, outside of, what they're experiencing right now. And so for them to be with others, I know that, we've heard people say just that they're breathing and just that they're bringing their kids to group and just that they're there really holds hope for them. And so when they're in, like Colleen mentioned, they get to sit across from somebody who's maybe a little further down the line, and to just their presence is hope that they can also get there someday. And so it's very powerful. And I think the pain in the room is such a connection, and they just take such good care of each other.
That is a beautiful thought, having the courage to bring your own children into this room, into this group where you know it will be vulnerable and scary. And depending on their age, they might be overwhelmed and scared and worried. And that's something you all beautifully address throughout the book is age appropriate conversations and tailoring the conversation and the topic and the way we talk about death and loss to your kids in a healthy way. Colleen, what is one of the pieces of advice that you give parents who have multiple kids at different ages and are dealing with the loss of a parent or a sibling or a grandparent? How can they preserve their own energy by not having the same conversation 12 different ways
Mm.
every other day with their kiddos? What's the best? Well, best is such a relative word. What's a helpful and sustainable approach for them to consider?
Yeah, that's a great question. I'm glad you're asking. As you said, we talk about it in the book, just how to have those conversations, which feel really big and scary. And a lot of times, as parents, we are worried that they are going to ask all the questions in one sitting. And that might even be the hardest part of those questions that we may not feel ready to answer yet. But the reality is that kids ask questions they're ready to receive answers to, and it's usually not all of them at once. So kids kind of start small, and by their age, their developmental, level, that's how you can tailor your responses. So, a great first question to them is, what are you wondering about? And they can start to ask those questions and give them the details of what happened at an age appropriate level. If it's a young child, you can tell them, that their dad's, his heart, he had a heart attack, which means his heart stopped working, which caused his body to stop working and he died. And explaining what that means when a body has died, that it no longer breathes, it doesn't feel pain, it's not hungry, and then expanding the conversation from there as they ask you more questions. With a teen, that conversation obviously will look a little different. Well, how did his body, like, well, why did he have a heart attack? Well, and then you can go into that. And the reality is they you do want to prepare yourself to answer the same questions over and over because that might happen. They kind of need to chew on it and process it and understand it. So knowing that you will have to answer those questions multiple times, most likely, but that you're not going to have to answer to the extent you might be afraid of all at once. It's going to come gradually.
That reminds me of the beginning of The Whole Brain Child, Dan Siegel's
Mm.
book about the little kid that's remembering a car accident and repeats themselves over and over. And I remember when my mom died, my daughter was only a year and a half old. She wasn't quite two yet. And so as she's gotten older, I've had similar moments where I'm reminding her of what happened to a certain degree, and she'll stop and cut it off. And then she'll come back around a year later and ask the same question, but a little
Mhm.
differently. And that is such a beautiful way to allow them to wonder. I love that
Mhm.
question. What are you wondering about? Because as grievers, that's something we constantly do. I wonder what would be different. I wonder what I could have done differently, right? All the bargaining and all the creativity we try to use to get
Mhm.
ourselves out of grieving. And it's such a beautiful place to invite healing into for kids.
Mhm.
Yeah, and the reality is when kids don't have the answers to their questions, they start to fill in the puzzle pieces themselves,
Yeah.
and it's usually not with the right information. And
Mhm.
so when they do get the right information later on, they have to regrieve that information. So it's best just to start from the beginning because also other people may know the truths, or versions of the truth, and they might tell your child instead of you. But
Mm.
ultimately, you want to be known as that person they can come to, that they can trust. We'll give them the answers that, they're ready to see or to hear.
Mhm.
And that way they'll continue to come to you over time,
Yeah.
establishing that bond of trust.
I think that that's such a scary place for a parent to be, wondering if your child will continue to trust you, knowing that things can change in a moment's notice, knowing that losses happen without our control all the time. And I'm just thinking about parents who are also uncomfortable in their own grief and afraid of expressing themselves around their kids inappropriately, or trying to hide away what they're feeling so their kids can feel, quote unquote, okay. And Erin, you have such personal and one-on-one experience with parenting through loss. I'm wondering how your own grief boundaries and your own experience was trying to navigate that.
Mm. Yeah, when we talk so much in the book about trying to let grief really move through you as you feel it, because, grief is just one of those things that just comes at you, right? It just comes and you just feel it and it's inside of you. And we really don't want to delay that expression because it just can make it makes you feel so much worse when you're grieving. And so I think what I learned as I went on is to try to express my grief as I was feeling it. And I think as a parent, it's so hard to really be honest in front of your children, but I think your children are so intuitive to know how you're feeling. And so even if you're not saying it or expressing it, they understand that whatever the sentiment is, the energy that is in the room, really. And so we really, and I did just have to learn, especially after my son's death, that I just needed to be honest kind of with my feelings, and also that I knew as honest as I learned to be honest, that it modeled that for my children. And so so that when they're feeling something, they're not trying to gauge whether they can express something, that they're able to organically grieve and really express the grief as they feel it. And so that seems to be just that cycle of letting it come in and then letting it move through you and finding a resource that you might need after, as it moves through you and whatever that might be. And so if you're just feeling just that wave of emotion, it might be that you just need to take a walk, you need to go outside, you just need to breathe it out. Maybe even, at times you are just asking why and, screaming it out, whatever it might be. And so, some of that is really done. I think as adults, I know for me, I would always it was always nice when those kinds of grief waves hit when I was either in my car by myself or something like that. And there are, of course, those times that you just need to really let yourself get that out of your body. But just being as honest as possible, because kids know and they're picking up on what is being felt in the room. And so as honest as we can be with our grief, giving permission to our children is I think the best way to go with the grieving, because it really models that healthy way of grief.
And I think too, to just piggyback on what you said, our kids are learning how not to grieve from people around them every day as well. They're seeing
Mhm.
emotional bypassing and suppression of emotions in schools, in TV. I'm fine. Declarations of it's okay.
Mhm.
No, move on. No, I'm not crying. You're crying. That we
Mhm.
say tongue in cheek, but really, even with my child at her age now, she'll say things like, well, I didn't want to upset you, so I kept it to myself. And I think to your
Mhm.
point, inviting them into that moment to say, well, you're not responsible for my reaction. You're
Mhm.
responsible for who you are and how you show up honestly. And that's our healthy family connection. That's our understanding that we hold space for each other when we are feeling messy and when we
Mhm.
feel like, no, we're actually not fine, but we have no idea what to do with it.
Mhm.
And I know that you mentioned it a few times too, Erin, with the moving your body and getting this energy through the body. And
Mhm.
as a somatic practitioner, that's my favorite approach,
Mhm.
because we don't recognize in our day to day lives how much of our emotional and heaviness and just trauma is trapped in our muscles
Mhm.
and in the joints and everything we
Mhm.
feel. Colleen, I'm curious as a practitioner too, how much of that somatic approach gets to come into the peer setting, and how much information do you give when they're, you know, trying not to overload with education and anything like that, but how do you create space for that to be part of the process?
That's a great question. You're right. We try not to, bring too much of that directly in because we are primarily that peer support. But what we do offer the kids every time that they're here is an art invitation. And with that, we have priming activities. So we try to incorporate some movement as we can in them. And the goal is that they are just learning a bunch of different types of coping skills throughout their time here that they can take with them when they find ones that work. And we can share those with our adults too. And so some of our go tos that we love is just the side to side swaying, shaking our bodies out. That's my personal favorite that I totally use, on my own. And it's such a good reset for my body. Throwing ice at the ground, what was one of our little activities. We just took ice outside with the kids and they got to throw it at the ground and hear it crack and throw it at the fence. And we told the adults that night that's what they were doing too, trying to kind of hope that maybe it would continue at home. And then Jessica's house, we're really fortunate to have a pretty big facility with over 13 therapeutic rooms of all different types of expression. So we have dramatic playroom, art room, we have a hospital room, and we have like a volcano room and sensory room. So those, of course, in slow movement are great spots to do some body movement, all with the hope that they're going to find things that work for them and also that they'll notice that difference in themselves so that it kind of reinforces that messaging of whatever you're holding inside, that is an energy. Let's move through it. Let's move it out of our body. And then you notice the difference afterwards.
Significantly notice the difference afterwards.
Mhm.
It is always astounding to me that even I can lose sight sometimes of how important it is to just shake. Shake off
Mhm.
the overwhelm, shake off the difficulty. I am a big fan of pressing against the wall.
Mhm.
I will press against the wall in my office 4 or 5 times a day, just depending on how the day is going. And when my family finds me, I'll invite them into it, whether they feel intense or not. Being able to say, this is actually a safe practice. You should try it, see how it feels,
Mhm.
because we all know we're oppressing something within us, holding
Mhm.
something back, and or not noticing how something's affecting us. And I think that that's such a beautiful place to really let ourselves soften without having to go through the vulnerability of talking about it and saying,
Mhm.
or even when we don't know how to name the feelings that we're feeling,
Mhm.
being able to like, well, actually, I do feel relief. I didn't realize I was clenching my jaw so hard.
Mhm.
And
Hmm.
it's so cool to see, kids, they are our greatest teacher. They do so many things just naturally in their day that are so good. Just all of the big sports they like to play, running around, walking, skipping, all those bilateral movements, shooting hoops, hitting a ball. They naturally know, things to do to help them feel better. They may not realize the benefits so that we can kind of point that out to them. And it's so nice to know, oh gosh, I already know how to do half this stuff.
Yeah.
It's not big, lofty things that I have to do. It's simple practices I'm already doing in my day. And that has been really freeing for me as an adult as I've learned how to really work with my body better.
Yeah, I showed my family the other day. We were all getting ready for bed and I was just resting. My husband came in and then my daughter came in and she wanted to get into the bed. And it's not a large king bed. So we're like all crammed in on this queen bed. And I was feeling frustrated. And I said, you guys want to do something with me? And I just started banging my legs up and down alternatively on the bed. And they were like, what is wrong with you? I'm like, yeah, I don't know. Try it. It was the
Mhm.
most fun we had had as a
Mm.
family in like a day or two. And we all felt so much relief, and there was so much laughter that came out of
Mhm.
it too. And I was like, you guys have no idea how therapeutic that was for all three of us individually and collectively. I love this. I'm so grateful. that you came in here, even though you were supposed to be in bed 25 minutes ago. Like, good job skipping out on it. Um, this question is kind of for both of you. So feel free. We'll start with you, Erin. Some of the things through the book that I know hit on big time for me, and in certainly my community, is this idea of a loss of spirituality or faith or doubt, really around
Mm.
death and around grief and around trying to help form our little humans into these expressive, confident, curious humans as they grow, and knowing full well, wait a minute, I'm a full grown adult and I'm questioning God and I'm angry and I'm frustrated. And how in the world am I supposed to present this to my children, especially if I'm also, on a level of like, do I believe what I have always believed or been taught?
Mhm.
So I'm curious how you are giving people permission to hold space for all of those secondary losses, like faith questions that come up when we are dealing with grief in a family.
Yeah. And I think that it really goes back to honesty too. And, after my son Carter died, I really had to say, and I was just feeling such a big doubt in my mind about God's protection over our family. And I had felt that in some ways in other deaths that I had experienced, but this one felt very different. And I really just had to be honest that it was really hard for me to feel safe in the world anymore. And I, really lost a lot of trust and a lot of feelings of safety. And as I just had to be just honest about that with God and just kind of let him, like, I just had to, like, kind of push away a little bit just to say, I'm not sure that I can trust you right now. And I let that just be for as long as it needed to be. And over time, I really felt him, leaning in and just saying, like, hey, I'm like, just let it be as long as it needs to be. And your faith actually comes from me. So it's okay if you just don't have that right now. And, and just that he'll restore that as, and when it's time and so I just really had to kind of trust that process. And over time I kind of developed a different kind of faith in some ways, and it had to just be a very organic process. And in that, I think I was just able to be honest with my kids, and I got to be really annoyed at church, and I got to throw some devotionals across the room. And, I had to just be really honest about how disappointed I was and how angry I was that everything that I had prayed for protection, it didn't happen in those moments. And yeah, I had to really wonder. And my son died in a car accident. And it's like, I just had to say, like, is it just physics? Is that what we're all kind of a part of here? Your car turns the wrong way, and this has people die. And, and just wondering, where was the protection? And it's so I think all of that is just such an honest process, and we can be honest with our kids and allow them to express those questions and enter in. That you're questioning that too, and you're wondering that too, and you may never have the answers for those questions. And maybe we don't get to know, and there's so much of life that's a mystery, and really sitting in that. And that's not a great, like, fun place to be, but it really is so much of where we are in life. And so, but I just, yeah, it just has to be an honest process.
It's almost as if grief is such an exposure that there's no more places to hide. Every little
Hmm.
area of our identity, of our egos, of our
Hmm.
experiences, our wants and desires become so tenuous. They become
Hmm.
so like surface, like available to explore at the surface, unfortunately, all at once.
Hmm.
And it really is that space of honesty where you just say, I have no idea. Thank you so much for asking. If you
Hmm.
find an answer, let me know. And I still don't know that I'll trust it because
Hmm.
there is so much uncertainty. Colleen, how do
Yeah.
you feel about this idea of supporting people while they're protesting the things they've believed and struggling against them?
Yeah, I think one of our biggest messages that Erin and I feel just deeply is just to be where you are. Wherever you are is where you are. And if we push against that, we can't work through it,
Yeah.
whatever that is. And so just be where you are. And if you're in that place of questioning, let yourself be there. Don't put judgment on yourself. How could I, feel this way? Or I must be a bad person. It's tricky when different members of the family are in different spots. Maybe your faith or your spirituality is everything to you right now and it's an anchor. And maybe it's really scary for you if your kids are questioning otherwise, something that's always been a very strong value in your family.
Yeah.
And so just again with that idea of wanting to still be that person that they can come to explore what their thoughts are, what their wonderings are. If we shut it down and just say, well, this is just what it is. We have to believe this. You kind of shut it down for maybe future opportunities. But if they know they can come to you with those questions and they won't scare you, maybe those questions won't scare them as much.
Yeah.
Or vice versa. Maybe you're the one that's really struggling, but they are holding on to their faith. And let them just as a family, it can be really hard, but if we can just let each other be where we are and just honor that, I think it actually paves the way for deeper connections
Yeah.
as opposed to everyone kind of just going at it on their own.
Yeah, I think about the families I know who've experienced loss and who have grown distant with one another. And I think probably early on, there was a lot of what you just described, that shutting down of uncertainty and the quieting of questions because of fear and because of
Mhm.
trying to control less, or rather more, of the ongoing changes and uncontrollable things. It really does create then down the road even more things that you have to decide. Are we going to work through this? Are we going to pretend it's not a thing? And it just becomes so overwhelming. Hmm. This really takes me to one of my last questions. I want to know, what is the vision that the two of you have for, yes, for Jessica's house, but really for how this book, When Grief Comes Home, can be a cultural shift for families who are avoiding these conversations, for families who have one person leading the way against all odds and against tons of resistance within the family to build any kind of grief literacy or resilience within. What's the vision? Erin, I'll start with you.
Mm. I really believe in the grief process.
Yeah.
And I really believe that if you allow it to be what it needs to be, that you will move through it. And each person in the family needs to have their own personal grief process. And as it's a delicate, just it's a beautiful dance actually. And it's interesting to like use the word beauty, but it can be a part of your family history. It's part of you. And it's something that you can trust as you allow each person to allow whatever it is, that grief process, to be what it needs to be.
Mm.
And as we talk about, feeling and expressing and trusting and accepting each person's grief reactions and how they need to walk through it and how they need to express it and what helps them, to find resources. Every resource will be different.
Yeah.
Throwing, like we mentioned, like throwing ice for one person and running for another, talking to a friend for one person and just going into your room and having a quiet time for another, giving each other the space and the support that each person needs, and a lot of acceptance. And just for this book, I would just want it to be a gentle companion to those walking through this, and for parents who are experiencing this very profound experience with grief, that they would find just someone to come alongside them, and to know that whatever it is, that kind of answer that's inside of them for what they need, that will be true, that there's something very good about the grief process. And as we go through it, that somehow we do emerge in a different way, and it is transformational.
Mm.
Yeah, and my hope, just to follow up with what Erin said, is I hope our book can offer permission,
Mhm.
for that grief process, that you just have permission to be where you are and to be feeling all of it. And, you made the comment about our society, and we do have that kind of good vibes only culture. We don't want to feel pain. Who does? But, it's through feeling the pain that we can really find healing, and expressing that. And so
Mhm.
I hope this book can just offer permission, to learn first and foremost through Erin and what she has done, and how she has honored her grief and worked and expressed and continues to do so. And then what she's created with Jessica's house. So, what we can start to try to change in family cultures that want to, so that there can be permission to grieve and to keep talking about the person who died.
Yeah.
Always hold a space for them and remember them and honor them. And they'll always be a part of the person's life forever, even though their physical presence is gone. So, just trying to really bring more awareness about how to do grief.
Yeah. Ladies, this has been such an encouraging and beautiful conversation. And I have to say, when I first started in this work, my live podcast, instead of recorded and saved, was called Permission Granted, because that
Mm.
was exactly what I saw as well, was this limiting and this fear of expressing it, that to the degree that it would never end, that we would never stop expressing the heaviness. And I think you've both beautifully described and clearly embody the reality that, yes, not only will we not always feel as heavy as we feel now, but there will be other things that come in to bear the burden. It doesn't disappear, but it does teach us how to expand around what we're learning and what we don't want to carry but must, and how to do it well with one another too, especially when we're leading little kids through the same kind of process. So
Mhm.
thank you
Yeah.
both so much for your time today. And anybody who's listening, they also have a podcast by the same name, When Grief Comes Home. So I highly recommend it as a companion if you're reading the book and you want a little bit more richness about them and their work. And certainly in the show notes, we'll have all the links for people to find out more about Jessica's house and how to support you guys in your work, as well as get their own copy of this book.
Thanks for having us, Mandy.
Yeah.
Thank you,
Thank you
Mandy. And
both.
thank you for the work you're doing.
Oh, yeah.
Mhm.
It's nothing. It's fine, right? Somebody's got to do it. Thank you for listening to episode 201 of Restorative Grief. When grief comes home, Erin and Colleen remind us, with support, honesty, and connection, healing becomes possible, even through the hardest losses. And I'm so grateful for Erin and Colleen's reminders that grief does not have to be navigated alone. In fact, we do much better navigating it with our people around us. Their book, When Grief Comes Home, A Gentle Guide for Living Through Loss While Supporting Your Child, is available wherever you find your books, and you can listen to their podcast, When Grief Comes Home, online as well on all major platforms. The show notes, of course, include the link to Jessica's house as well, if you are in Northern California and know a family that could use some extra grief support. If this is your first time listening to the podcast, thank you so much for making time to be here. I hope you heard something that was encouraging and that inspired you to create or maybe just enrich your own peer support for the losses you are living through. Learn more about Erin and Colleen's work as well as about restorative grief by checking out the show notes. And of course, shout out to all of the patrons who support restorative grief. Thank you so much. Without you, it wouldn't be possible. If you're interested in learning more about that, you can go to the show notes again or check out patreon.com/Mandy Capehart. And as always, before we go, one last thing. Please remember, the only solution for grief is to do the work of grieving. Thank you for listening. I'll see you next week.